Hello, everyone. Happy Thursday. I don't know about you, but this week flew by fast.
Mhm.
All righty, so we're going to go ahead and get started. My name is Karis Adams, pronouns she, her, and hers, and I am the Professional Development Specialist at Mid-America Arts Alliance. I will be in the background monitoring the chat and helping Shannon with whatever she wants. So just in case you need something, you can find me down yonder in the chat and message me directly if you'd like. Thank you for joining us today for Mapping Toward Fulfillment with Shannon M. Turner. We here at Mid-America Arts Alliance believe in strengthening and supporting artists, cultural organizations, and communities throughout the region and beyond. We are a regional arts organization representing Arkansas, Kansas, Missouri, Nebraska, Oklahoma, and Texas. Using a combination of workshops, coach consultations, and peer-to-peer learning opportunities, we work with arts leaders like you to govern more effectively, become more fiscally astute, and develop strategies to address community needs. And the community needs Shannon M. Turner. Shannon is the founder and creative director of Story Muse, which offers storytelling techniques as a tool for personal discernment, team building, and community development in an effort to cultivate a world where all stories are heard and honored. Shannon serves as an independent consultant who conducts workshops and provides coaching to individuals and organizations seeking to use true personal stories for transformative potential. She has over 2 decades of professional experience and an MFA from Virginia Tech. And I will drop her link in the website, and I will also include it in an email after this workshop, along with the slides and the survey link. But if you would like to go ahead and open up a tab, if you have 20-something tabs open like I do, the link to find out more information about Story Muse and Shannon is storymuse.net. Please remember to keep your microphones muted until prompted by the host. For questions, feel free to drop them in the chat and I will monitor, and Shannon will also cue you to ask questions and to come off mic, as this is a highly participatory workshop. So without further ado, I hand it over to Shannon.
Thank you so much, Karis. It is a pleasure to join you all. I know that you're from a large swath across the US, so I already put in a prompt question about if you were spice, what kind of spice would you be? Would love to hear about that in the chat, but also give us some shout outs from where you're calling in today. We'd love to see that beautiful broad quilt of Mid-America that we're having to enjoy today. Also, as Karis mentioned, this is a highly participatory workshop. I know a lot of times with Zoom, we just want to sort of like turn on and tune out, as they used to say in the 60s. But we really encourage you to turn on your camera and be with us today. And honestly, it makes my job so much easier. I don't know if you've ever had to lead a workshop like this, but it is so tough if you're just talking to a wall of names that you don't know. So with that said, we're going to dive in here. If you will have some patience with me, I'm learning how to do the toggle back and forth between 2 screens at the same time, which is always just a little bit of a fun challenge. As Karis mentioned, I'm a storyteller and story coach. I go all over helping people tell their stories for personal, professional, organizational, and community development. That looks a lot of different ways depending on the client. I've worked with girls who've been sex trafficked. I've worked with people who are building their way out of being unhoused. I've worked with people with disabilities, and then lots of real estate agents and academics and clergy in between. I like to say that there's no one who doesn't need to be able to tell a good story. So perhaps this opportunity today will just be the beginning, as they say in Casablanca, Louis, I think this is the beginning of a beautiful friendship. Let's keep going together after we start our story today. So I'm going to go ahead and launch in with a question. I mentioned that this is going to be a participatory workshop, so I hope that you will be willing to come off mic and share with me some thoughts about what was your first experience, your earliest memory of storytelling. Tell us either through the chat or through speaking into the mic, what's your first memory, earliest memory of storytelling?
Can I go first?
Please do. Go for it.
My name is Elaine Thomas, and I live in LaGrange, near LaGrange, Texas. But I was brought up in Canada on a farm south of Calgary. And my earliest memories of storytelling were of my grandmother talking about immigrating to Canada as a pioneer.
Did we lose that person or did I get lost? Am I here?
No, you're here. Yeah.
Okay.
Elaine was succinct.
Oh, okay. Okay, gotcha. Elaine, so I heard your grandmother was talking about her stories about immigrating. Was that where we landed?
Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit more about what it was like to experience her telling those stories? Like, was she animated? Did she do voices? Did she lean in and whisper? What was it like to listen to her tell a story?
Well, even as a child, I had the feeling that what I was listening to was very important and that she wanted me to carry it forward, that it was not just something she was doing to entertain me, but it was something that was important to our family story. And she told it very well. She told them the stories often enough that before I could read, I could go to the picture of my grandfather's parents and siblings in a garden in England, and I could name them from left to right. I couldn't read yet. I didn't know what those names were, but because of the stories she told me, their names stuck with me.
Amazing. That's so lovely. Thank you for sharing that, Elaine. We're getting some good comments over here on the chat as well. More grandmothers telling stories. Oh, washing my hair in the kitchen sink. Oh, Katrina, that's so beautiful. I just got my hairs done today. And so I had that lovely experience of somebody washing my hair for me. Oh, there's just nothing like it. She would tell me stories and keep me from wiggling and getting shampoo in my eyes. Wonderful. Oh, and little golden books. I remember the little golden books. Those were great stories. We get some more comments through people speaking into the mic about what it was like to have someone tell them a story. And where did that happen?
Sure. One of my earliest remembrances of storytelling would be from my mother, and two story books that we would return to time and again. We did a lot of reading of books, but the stories of the Velveteen Rabbit and the Gift of the Magi were both read through such repetition to me. And then additionally, I was thinking more along the storytelling more from the heart rather from a book. And I had a lot of sick nights as a child, and telling stories was one of the ways that when my mother would be by my bedside offering me comfort, the stories would give me an escape.
Beautiful. Anyone else?
Yeah, when I was growing up, I was lucky enough to have my great grandmother around. She died at 104. And so she told us tons of stories. And every time we went over to her house, it was like story time. Like you would just sit in and listen to great grandma talking about stories and telling us about family, sometimes which, do a little bit of digging, and it ended up not being entirely true. Her memories were not always 100% correct, but we always used to laugh because she would start so many stories with when I was a little girl, and we would get back in the car and say things like, when you were a little girl, they thought the Titanic would make it to America. Like, when you were a little girl, like that broad swath of this concept that like when she was a little girl, it was nothing like when me and my sisters were little girls, but still hearing those stories about what it was like for her growing up was so incredible.
Fantastic. Can you tell us, and Karen, your name looks familiar. I feel like I know you from somewhere. Did you connect with us when I was at Roots?
Maybe.
Okay.
I don't know. I work in field services, so I connect with a lot of people. Yeah, I don't know.
So tell me about when your grandmother would tell the stories. So you said it was like something about being in the car. How would she draw you in with the stories?
it was honestly, it was just like, you just knew when you went over to great grandma's house that like
Uh-huh.
what we were there to do was to sit in the living room and talk to great grandma. Like, first of all, there was nothing else to do at her house as a young child. But she would always get out, like I think Elaine mentioned, like she would always get out the family photos, and those would be what would trigger some of these stories and conversations. And so, yeah, it was just kind of, I think part of what made us so interested to just sit there and listen was the fact that these experiences she was recounting were so very different from the lives that we could understand, because it was so much longer ago.
Yeah, yeah. I love that point about there was nothing else to do. I feel like these days, I wonder if kids are getting those family stories because we just like plop them down with their earphones and their tablets and say, go to town watching your cartoons. And I don't know if family stories are being passed down the way they used to be. I know that I'm so grateful for them because they made me who I am, but I feel like as we're going to get into today, it's such an important way for us to connect as humans. So thank you all so much for joining in on that discussion. We're going to transition a little bit here. Feel free to keep adding things in on the chat, and I will take those and copy them into our slides. So today I want to really, just iterate again that it's this workshop is as much on y'all as it is on me in order for us to get successfully to the end. So please participate as you can. And I really want to encourage us to have not just a safe space, but a brave space. And that means that we're going to share with each other with our hearts and not be too concerned about being judged. We'll talk about that a little bit more. So I know that the grander mission for this workshop is for us to talk about how you fundraise and do development work for your organizations. But I sort of want to start that from the angle of personal storytelling and how we do connect with each other through our stories. There's so much that's going on in the world these days around storytelling. This is a beautiful concept that I just learned about in terms of the powers of story and how we can use stories in all these different ways. And I'm looking forward to talking about how we get to that place of abundance for you and your organization. But with the personal storytelling, I feel like there's these like rippling effects in the way that the stories we tell ourselves as individuals have echoes in how we tell ourselves about the organizations that we are, the communities that we are, the nations that we are, and then all of those things go back and inform each other. There is a lot of brain science behind storytelling. And at the end of the workshop, you all are going to receive a private webpage that I've built just for this workshop that will include a whole lot of resources that I've gathered in terms of podcasts, books, articles, you name it. Once you get into this, you start finding a lot of really interesting, juicy stuff. So one of the things that I'm sure you've already figured out if you are a development director is that a story is often much more effective than listing a bunch of facts and statistics. And that's one of the reasons why we want to get better at it so that we can connect with people more authentically. Brene Brown, who is our country's leading researcher on vulnerability, has this famous quote, which is that stories are just data with a soul. And I love that. I think that's so important. But there's a way that when you tell a story to someone, your neurons actually mirror up so that it's almost like they're experiencing the same thing you are. It's an incredibly impactful way to just influence people and to connect and to build empathy. So I mentioned that I had a sense of probably what it is that your role is, but I would love to, if you don't mind, to come back on the mic or put in the chat. Tell me about your work, what you are struggling with, where you feel like storytelling might apply and be helpful to the work that you do. I'm going to start calling on people if I have to.
I'll jump in. This is Trilla. I'm from Kansas City, and I and the founding director and executive director, artistic director, fundraiser, et cetera, for Kansas City Baroque Consortium. So we specialize in early music. So it's a very, it's a niche performing arts group. And I think a big part of our goal is to reach a broader audience so that they have a chance to recognize what this particular music has done and sort of growing music across several centuries, but making it a very personal thing. So it's not just an intellectual appreciation, but an opportunity to really engage with our small ensemble. So we're fairly young and we're fairly small, but I have dreams.
Juliet, can you tell me a little bit about how you all go about working together as a team, and or how you might be using storytelling or might like to use storytelling to bring more abundance to the organization?
We definitely incorporate it in we do a summer season. So we incorporate it in our 3 concert summer season. So there's a storyline that is creating context for the music that we're exploring each summer. What I'd really love to do is figure out a way to do that through our fundraising efforts, because I feel like we're not really capturing people's interest in joining us on a higher level than just coming to concerts.
Gotcha. Well, thank you so much for sharing that.
Okay.
I see a few other people who, if you're already on camera, then that means you're a likely victim, because I can look you in the eye. So I'm going to call on Angie. Angie Olson, would you be willing to share a little bit about your work and how storytelling might help?
Sure. So I work as the grant coordinator for the city of Fremont in Nebraska. And we're currently pursuing certification as a creative district. And one of the items that's been kind of a struggle is figuring out our current identity and the story, our unique story for Fremont to tell as we pursue this certification. So just here to see what I can learn, and if I can help out some of our local organizations and nonprofits along the way, that's a bonus too.
Tremendous. Thank you so much. Let's hear a little bit from Jennifer Thomas. Jennifer, would you be willing to tell us about your group?
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, great. Yeah. Like the last gal, I'm also in Nebraska, and we're in the same situation of applying for a creative district grant. And those are through our state art council, and they really help promote, especially small towns. My town is 377 people, and it's just a great opportunity to include the arts in pursuing economic development and creating fun spaces and places. So I recently retired. Was an art teacher for 39 years. And now I'm one of the few people in town that has a little bit of free time. So I kind of got roped into doing this endeavor of applying for the grant and all that stuff. So I just wanted to learn more about it. And we, once, like the other lady from Fremont, kind of stuck on the current project of picking an identity, because we want to make sure that we get it right the first time, so we don't have to go through and redo the paperwork. And we want to move on and start doing projects and fun things. So yeah.
Fantastic. So in the chat, we have Ron Green, who says that his organization actually is a storytelling organization. So shout out to a fellow storyteller. Do you want to tell us a little bit about your work, Ron? You're on mute.
Classic mistake. Yeah, we are in the Kansas City urban core. We are teaching kids how to do effective storytelling using digital technology. We teach things like stop motion animation, video production, that kind of thing. And what we've found, what we're really trying to do is give them a voice, help to understand, how to share their voice through effective storytelling. And our biggest challenge has been a lot of kids don't know how to tell a story. When we did our first animations, claymations, they were chase scenes and fight scenes, not stories. Mm-hmm. So we really work on the story side.
Wow, that sounds like really interesting, fun work. And I have to tell you that ever since I became a professional storyteller, one of the most interesting things is the conversations that I have with people when they ask me what I do. Because when I say I'm a storyteller, they say, oh, so you're a filmmaker, or, oh, so you do social media. oh, so you're a writer. Like there's so many ways that the word storytelling gets interpreted. And I'm like, no, I'm the OG kind of storyteller, like literally get up and like the kind of story that we used to, you know, tell each other standing around a campfire about the tiger we escaped from that day. But I love that you're using storytelling as a part of your mission already. And hopefully that will help you in terms of your fundraising even more. So it was the winter of my discontent. The first of many, as it turns out, because I'm a sufferer of seasonal affective disorder, but I didn't know that yet. It was the night before exams, my junior year of college, and I was wandering. I was literally wandering from dorm room to dorm room, bothering the crap out of everybody. They were doing the thing that you're supposed to do the night before exams, which is what? Study, right? Or drink heavily and play Skip Bo and watch Days of Our Lives on the VCR because it was the 90s. As they were all doing the thing that you're supposed to do, I was wandering around having the same conversation with everyone. Should I drop out of school? Should I take a semester off? Or should I just keep barreling through? The reason for all of this deep, dark, angsty business is because my uncle had died of AIDS here in Atlanta a few semesters before, and he'd almost passed from this earth without telling anyone in our family who he was or that he was dying. And it led me to question who we were, that he would feel like he had to hide himself in that fashion. But also it was college. So depression is just on the menu of things that you choose from every once in a while, you know, like go to class, be depressed, take your car out for a drive, be depressed. So as I'd had about the 5th or 6th version of that conversation, finally they said, enough. We have had it with you and your angsty business. We nominate you to go down to midnight brunch on our behalf. You see, the sweet little liberal arts college in Southwest Virginia where I went, all of the faculty and administration would show up the night before exams, and they would do the sweetest thing. They would serve us midnight brunch before they then slowly killed us over the next 2 weeks. And we thought it was so fun. We would show up with, you know, our Norton anthologies tucked under our arms and half dressed in pajamas, and we would eat the pizza and eggs and waffles and syrup on a styrofoam plate and then go back to our room to, you know, study or that other thing. So I thought this was a wonderful idea my friends had. You know, get out of their hair, get out of my head, do something useful, which they say is a great way to sort of jumpstart the depressive cycle. I was wandering back through my dorm yard when I had one of those moments. They happen to me frequently. Perhaps they happen to you as well, where I'm in one place and then I'm in another, horizontal on the ground. Frequently, there's a lot of pain involved. This time was sponsored by the fact that someone had left a cap half off the pipe in the yard. And if I thought I was existentially stuck before, now I was quite literally stuck because I could not pull my foot out of the pipe. And I was in so much pain because that pipe had scraped all the way up my shin from ankle to knee. Help! Because again, this was the 90s, so I didn't have one of those ubiquitous little devices in my back pocket that I could just pull out and call and text someone. Now, from seeing the pictures I can see of people here on this webinar, I'm imagining that y'all will remember that a few years before this, baby Jessica had fallen down a well, right? 18-month-old infant who wandered out of her home and fell straight down into the earth. I remembered this moment distinctly because back in the day, when something major happened, you didn't flip to CNN's 24-hour news coverage. They just preempted the 4 channels that existed, and they played the news until the issue was resolved. And I was undone by baby Jessica because she preempted Beauty and the Beast with Ron Perlman and Linda Hamilton before she got guns for Terminator 2. So I couldn't hack it. All I could imagine was the helicopters and the spotlights down in my face. Hour 18. College student Shannon Turner has been stuck in this pipe for 18 hours as rescuers have struggled valiantly to free her. Until finally, one of my friends looking for her pizza and eggs and waffles and syrup on a styrofoam plate came wandering out of the dorm onto the balcony and heard me yelling into the darkness. And then she came in down to the yard and she said, "What's the matter for you?" And I said, and she said, "Well, just stand up." Right. You see, lying down as I was causing my foot to point out like this. But as soon as I stood up, it caused my foot to point down like this. And so I was easily able to pull it out of the pipe. And so these days, sometimes when I feel like life has just knocked me down, sometimes I'm able to remember all I need to do is stand up. Okay, so we're going to use that story as a jumping off place. We don't even have to say it's a good story. It's just an example of a story and how we might use our stories to connect with each other. So I have, again, sorry, I'm still learning how to toggle back and forth between my monitor and all of that. So what did you notice about that story? And again, you can put this in the chat, or I'd love it if you'd be willing to come on mic and tell me, what is your reflection? What did you notice about that story?
I enjoyed how you made it relatable and created some common ground, and then shared your authentic piece with it as well.
Thank you for that. Can you tell me what made the story relatable to you?
I too went to a small liberal arts college, and we didn't have brunch though, midnight brunch. That seems pretty cool. So just remembering back to those days of finals and all of the pressure that one feels, and that brought me right back there.
Gotcha. Thank you. Thank you. Let's hear from someone else. What did you notice about this story?
You included a lot of fun details.
What's a detail you remember?
Oh, even details like the brunch and the finals and all of that. Someone could carve that story down to it was night and I was walking across the quad and the foul and the prelude and the various details about the experience as a whole, the experience as a college student in the finals, which didn't directly relate to being on the ground with your foot in a hole. But it created the connection and that relatability.
Thank you.
I think made people think about similar circumstances.
Gotcha. Thank you so much. Ron says, shared your feelings about what you were experiencing in the moment, right? So that is a really crucial part of storytelling. Do y'all know Ira Glass, the man who hosts This American Life? He has this beautiful meditation on storytelling where he says it's action, reflection, big action, big reflection. Like that's his whole philosophy about how he approaches a story on This American Life.
I thought your story came from the heart. You weren't trying to sugarcoat it or impress us to convince us of anything in particular. It came from the heart.
Thank you. Any other observations, things that you'll remember later? Okay. Go for it.
The beautiful way you wove in your metaphor about standing up and then relating that to the seasonal depression that you and so many have. That was a really great way to tie it all together.
Thank you. We're going to get back to that, how you tie it up at the end.
I appreciated the moral of the story. The fact that we often blind ourselves about our own capabilities or our own insights through that sense of fear, like I'll never figure this out, or I don't know how to reach these people.
Thank you. Thank you for that. So as I've gone about trying to teach people about storytelling, I've kind of hit upon this metaphor of a sandwich. Like, who here loves a good sandwich? Right? Yeah, sandwiches are delicious. And the thing that I love about them most is that they're personal. Like, you get to choose what's on your sandwich, and they're well organized, which I'm hoping we will be able to figure out how to do with our stories as well. So if the sandwich is, if your story is like a sandwich, then the first line and the last line are the bread that hold it all together. And this can apply not just to a personal story, but also to the stories that you will hopefully be working on telling about your organizations. One of the things that I want to make sure I'm emphasizing here is that learning how to speak our stories makes us better writers and vice versa. But there is some distinction there, and we'll get into the brain science of that. So how often have you watched somebody strike out to tell a story, and they probably know the beginning of it, but they maybe haven't figured out how they're going to land it at the end? So that is such an important part of how you deliver a great message, is to know how your story ends, not just how it begins. I like to think of it as like the gymnast who tumbled across the floor, and you see this image of her with her arms up in the air. You want to strive for that feeling of having landed your story, and without wobbling. So, and I don't mean the wobble that we do at the wedding, right? Like, what would be the storytelling equivalent of a wobble?
Getting lost in the details.
Yeah, yes, absolutely. And I think that a lot of times, when we have everyday conversation, it's like a tennis match, right? Like, the energy goes back and forth. I hit the ball to you, you hit the ball back to me. But when we go to tell a story, we take that energy and we hold on to it for a while. And then when we're done, I think a lot of people aren't used to holding on to that power or that energy for so long. And so it starts to drain out of their body, and you see them start getting really nervous and fumbly. And that's when you hear people say things like, well, I guess that's all my story, you know, or what was it Forrest Gump said? That's all I got to say about that. So knowing your last line and sticking that landing is really helpful for your story to have more impact. So if the first line and the last line are the bread that holds your story together, then the details are the lettuce. And here's why. How many times have you gotten a sandwich that was so piled high full of lettuce that you had to take off the top piece of bread and scoop off some of the lettuce and put it back together just so you could fit it in your mouth? But also, how many times have you gotten a sandwich where you're like, what this sandwich needed was some good, crisp lettuce? So details are just like that, because you do want them to be crisp and you want them to serve and drive your story forward. Too much is too much, too little is too little. Figuring out the details that serve that story and make it really pop is really crucial. I used to have this aunt who was notorious for, when she would tell a story, before you knew it, she'd be telling you about how the towels were folded in the hotel bathroom. And nobody needed to know that for that story. So figuring out the right details is super important. So I like to say that vulnerability is the cheese of your sandwich. And that is because I don't ever want to eat a sandwich that doesn't have cheese on it. Now, one of the things that I've come to understand about the word vulnerability is that it's complicated. I work with a lot of different types of people, and I think that while there is a sort of lovely blossoming of a flowering of the sense of vulnerability and all of that, we're not all on the same page with what that means or how safe people feel with each other in terms of vulnerability. So I think it's really crucial for us to be mindful of that when we're requesting of each other that we be more vulnerable. I mentioned Brene Brown. She is a wonderful storyteller researcher, and she has come up with this concept of floodlighting, which is when you've taken all your vulnerability and sort of like vomited it out there in front of other people, and they kind of feel like maybe you should be paying them for therapy. And so after that, if you've been too vulnerable and you floodlighted other people with your emotions, then you end up with a vulnerability hangover. which I think is really sometimes can be hard to deal with. So I like to say what we're striving for here is appropriate vulnerability. So if I could get one of you lovely ladies to come on the mic and tell us if you exfoliate, and if so, like, what's your routine with exfoliating? Maybe we have some gentlemen out there that exfoliate too. That would be awesome. Want to hear from whoever is willing to talk about exfoliating.
I guess I exfoliate. I have like a scrub in the shower that I use in the morning.
Nice, nice. And if you scrub that every day really hard, what would happen?
I'd probably over exfoliate.
Right? You would get kind of raw and like your skin would become super sensitive. But what would happen if you skipped exfoliating for like a month?
Then it'd just be muck and clogged pores and all that.
Right? Your skin kind of becomes sort of a little bit more dry, you know, it sort of starts to build up. So exfoliating is like vulnerability, because if you are too raw, then it's too much vulnerability. But if you don't share anything of yourself, if you don't have any skin in the game, so to speak, then that's not enough vulnerability. And you've probably seen both versions of this. Like maybe you've gone to a poetry slam or church or something where someone has just, like I said, they've become way too vulnerable and you feel very uncomfortable. But then have you ever seen someone try to tell a story where they're not putting any real details? They're like trying to change the names of everybody. They're being very vague and kind of holding their cards close to the vest. And it doesn't make for a successful story because you can't connect with it. One of the things that they say in the storytelling world is the universal and the specific. So some of you all mentioned how you connected with my story because even though it wasn't exactly like your experience, there was something that you resonated with. And that's why being open about ourselves is helpful in how we connect with each other. So change is the meat or the spicy tofu of your sandwich. So who remembers this figure on the left from English class? Somebody walk us through this figure and about how they would talk in English class about how this was the, how you map out a story.
I'll try to take a crack at it since I'm a former English teacher.
Perfect.
Exposition is the stage where you orient people to what's going on in the story, where are they, who is involved, so on and so forth. The rising action is the complication that develops early in the story where things start to not go as expected, and it kind of creates a little bit of anticipation. The climax is that point in the story where some action needs to be taken or things are going to get worse. So somebody makes a decision, someone gets transformed, something causes a change in direction. The falling action is how that resolves itself, the action that person took. And the denouement is kind of the afterwards look at what we saw, what we learned, what insight we received in the process.
Perfect. Thank you, Ron. If you don't mind to stick with me, I'm wondering if you also by chance took chemistry class.
Yeah, but I didn't do as well in chemistry.
And that's why I became an English teacher, right?
Exactly.
But do you remember the symbol on the right from chemistry and what it is?
Delta.
And what it means?
Delta means change.
Exactly. So I really encourage people to find the change in their story. This symbol from chemistry class meant that some, when they were mapping out some like chemical reaction, this showed that change had occurred. So our chemical process had happened. So when you are endeavoring to tell a story, you really want to find the change, what's changed in me, the circumstances, the environment. If you can't figure out what the change is, you may not have successfully completed your story. And it is the difference. Someone mentioned like there was a way that I could have told the story I told at the beginning that would have just been like this one time in college, I put my foot down a hole. Well, it took me, 6 minutes and some details for you to see the change that had occurred, correct? So we really want to figure out that change. And that sort of ties also to that notion of the last line and what is the lesson or the moral of the story that we're trying to come about. Now, the thing about storytelling is that once you get into it, you start to see it all around you. I've been thinking about that joke about the young fish who run into the older fish, and the older fish says, "Hey boys, how's the water?" And the young fish say, "What's water?" Once you get more and more into storytelling, you start to see that it's all around us. It's in the way that, certainly the way that we're marketed to. A lot of storytelling for good and for bad is happening in our political realm. But it also connects with who we are and how we make our choices. So this was one of my favorite pandemic watches, Self-Made, the story of Madam C.J. Walker. She's actually an Atlanta celebrity because some of her work was located here. But she has this beautiful saying about how hair can be freedom or bondage, and the choice is yours. And I feel the same way about the stories that we tell. So I know that since we're talking about a lot of you are like maybe formerly the development director of an organization, or you're raising money, I wanted to take a moment to tell you that my last job before I went out and started my storytelling practices, I was the managing director of a dance company. And I had been brought in, the person who had been the managing director and the artistic director were sort of like not getting along very well sometimes, or just, you know, some not great things were happening. So the managing director that was there got demoted to being the development director. And then I came in and I was managing her and, you know, a bunch of other people. So as you can imagine, that was a little bit of an HR nightmare. It was really tough. She was very gracious, but it was just sometimes a little bit awkward. But even as the development director, she was sometimes still struggling, even though she was able to like hone in on one part of her job. And so I and the artistic director would, we would have these meetings together with her periodically, and always there would be tears. And I don't know about you, but tears to me, like, they're important. They help to sometimes show an imbalance of power, but when it happens over and over again, it's really hard. And I was having a hard time witnessing this month after month after month. The problem with a lot of the time had to do with the fact that she was really focused on the grant writing. So as a development person, somebody tell me, like, what are the 3 or 4 legs of what development is for an artistic person? What all are you doing? What are your activities? Phyllis, do you mind to tell us a little bit about your work?
No, I don't. Thanks for calling on me.
Okay.
I am fairly new to my role as an executive director and wearing many hats, including programming and development. In the realm of development, we are writing grants. We are entertaining individuals from corporate entities and soliciting sponsorships. We seek donations. And we generate small streams of revenue through our professional development.
Right. That sounds about spot on to me. So in my understanding, the 3 or 4-legged stool of development is that it's often grant writing, soliciting individual donations, corporate donations, and then events, like you host fundraising events. And in this circumstance, the person who is now the development director was always concentrating on the grant writing, and she had a grant writer. So she was mostly just managing that person. So finally, one day when we were in this situation again with the uncomfortable meeting and the tears, I just like closed everything down and pushed it all back. And I said, you know what, Emily, I'm going to tell you a story. I remember when I was in the 6th grade and I would come home every day with the like paper folders that had the brackets in the pockets, one for each subject, tucked under my arms. I would come into my bedroom and immediately I would do my math homework, because I was already getting those messages as a female that I wasn't supposed to be good at math or like it very much. And so I would do my math homework quickly and I would get it out of the way. And then I would spend the rest of the night concentrating on my social studies and my English homework and all of that stuff, the things that I liked better and thought I was good at. And later on in high school, when I took the SAT, I scored exactly the same on math and verbal. And it had never occurred to me that I was doing my math homework quickly. So, you know, even though I was getting it out of the way, I was actually pretty good at it. I wonder if there's any kind of lesson for you in that. And immediately, like, her whole aspect changed. She like sat up a little bit more and, you know, she wiped her face and she said, I do the grant writing with Jenny because it's not lonely, because I know how to do that. And I am terrified at the idea of walking into a bank or a large industry and asking them for money. I don't know how to do that. And 3 months later, she quit her job. Now, I wish I was telling you this story as an example of how I use storytelling to sort of turn the whole situation around. But in the end, I think that telling that personal story helped her figure out that she was never going to like her job or feel good at it. And now she is in an amazing job, still in the arts, but not one where she has to do work that she hates and doesn't feel good at. So I just wanted to give that story as an example for how we connect with each other, but also how we figure out what we're good at, right? So storytelling has a lot of power, an incredible amount of power. Sometimes I feel like we sort of take that for granted. Anybody listen to The Hidden Brain? I know I'm giving a lot of NPR references here. Does anybody ever listen to the Hidden Brain on NPR? So one of my favorite episodes recently, was talking about this very thing.
Over time, Jared came by the work of another pioneer in behavioral science. Psychologist Aaron Beck was not looking at geopolitical conflict. He was studying people with emotional disorders.
And Beck comes along, and he was a depression researcher. And he found that depressed people were making these claims like, I'm worthless, or my boss hates me, or my spouse thinks that I'm not good at this, and so on and so forth. And people had known for forever that these extremely negative beliefs were a part of depression somehow, but they thought that they were symptoms. And Beck was really the first one who was like, you know what, these extremely simple and even simplistic statements are not symptoms, perhaps. They are causes.
It turned out to be a profound insight. Most of us think that we see the world as it is, that our beliefs are shaped by our experiences. So we don't stop to wonder if our beliefs might actually shape the world we see.
How does that land for you? What do you think about that notion that the stories we tell ourselves shape the world that we see? Morgan, would you be willing to tell us a little bit about your thoughts or reflections on that idea?
I don't really have anything to add.
That's fine. That's fine. Thank you. So what I'm trying to get at here is this notion that that our stories are informed by and also inform our choices. So one of the articles from the TED organization, they don't just, by the way, have the great TED Talks. TED produces articles that you can read. And one of the articles that they sent was about how there's two kinds of people in this world, which I think is hilarious. Like, two kinds of people in this world, two kind of people who think there's only two kinds of people in this world and everybody else, right? But actually, this was really profound. They talked about how they're the people in this world who talk about their life as going from good to bad, and other people who talk about their life as going from bad to good. And when you are spinning the story of your life in that capacity, then that creates the choices that you make. And this is definitely something I've learned from working with certain populations that we might call marginalized, which is a complicated word. But I think one of the things that we can do, even as organizations, is to pay attention to the stories that we're telling about who we are. When I was the managing director of that dance company, we had a board that was not really working very hard. And so the artistic director and I came up with a strategy, which is that I would go through and interview every single board member and really ask them if they still wanted to be on the board. And I found this story kept popping up in those interviews, which was that the artistic director had had a catastrophic car accident about a decade before I was doing these interviews. And people always came back to that story and talked about what a galvanizing moment it was in the life of the organization. And I started to come to understand that the reason why that was such an important story is because they didn't typically feel like they had a job. Like they didn't have a role with the organization until that there was a leadership vacuum, and which really helped me understand that the organization, like they needed to have clear work mandate. They needed to understand how their work for the organization would help us be more successful. And sometimes we just get stuck in a story that, is hard to get out of. So I love this quote: everything that happens to you is a reflection of what you believe about yourself. We cannot outperform our level of self-esteem. We cannot draw to ourselves more than we think we are worth. And boy, howdy, how many times as arts organizations do we go, kind of begging and saying, we know the arts are under-supported and, but we really need to talk about our value, and so that we, people will support us. Anybody here familiar with framing theory? This is the idea that there's a lot of encoded DNA in the way we tell our stories. So you can see this, the difference between these two pictures. In framing theory, one of the things they talk about is how politics is sort of like really driven by this. And so if we talk about my family, my job, my community, versus our family, our community, where we put the importance on the work, then that's also going to shape what we're doing. This is not getting any easier over time. We're living in a world where the whole notion of reality is getting more and more fractured. This picture on the left is a doctored photo. It was going around on the internet a few years ago. And people were talking about it as an example of how Dr. King was this person that a lot of people didn't understand. And actually the photo on the right is the real photo. But this is just an example of how we are getting driven further and further apart through the power of storytelling, but also because we aren't able to connect with each other very authentically. There's all these ways like fake news and deep fakes and alternative facts that are keeping us from being able to connect with each other. Did anybody have any reflections on that? Okay, that's fine. So we're going to use.
I would like to. I think it's one of the reasons that it's difficult for real messages to get through on the part of organizations, particularly on social media. When you've got things that are sponsored and anonymous and don't offer the value they say they're going to, then you become a voice in a crowd when you're sitting there as a local organization really trying to benefit the people in the community.
It's so
So
true.
whether those are considered, I think in some cases they're deep fakes, sometimes they're scams. They're usually always a money grab. But it is hard to set oneself apart from them.
Yes, yes. I mean, even just Amazon profile reviews, like how many of those are just robots now? Like you feel like you can't trust anything that's out there. So that's why I really want to encourage us to get back to the old school standing around the fire and whatever that looks like for you. So as I have endeavored to become a storyteller, one of the things I've learned is that I needed to become a better story listener. So here's some beautiful statistics on listening that I pulled from Tara Brock's podcast recently. 80% of what we know from listening, and yet 75% of the time we are distracted, preoccupied, or forgetful. 1 hour after listening, we recall 20% of what we've heard, and the average person listens with only 25% efficiency. The first time I really started to pick up on the fact that this was a problem was actually years ago. So my dad was a Methodist preacher, and most of the time we would ride the bus home and he would come home later, but every once in a while he would pick us up from school and he would still have part of his workday to go through. So we would go with him as he went to the hospital or to visit shut-ins in their homes. And he would sit there and listen to them as they would talk about their pain and their lives and their stories. And after about 15, 20 minutes, he would sit forward and he'd put his hands on his knees and he'd go, uh-huh. And then after a while, he'd stand up and he'd start rocking back and forth, uh-huh, uh-huh. And eventually he'd start moving his way toward the door, uh-huh, uh-huh, uh-huh. And finally he'd say, well, let's say a prayer. And finally, one day it sort of dawned on me, this dude's not been listening for the last 15 minutes. Like his mind's out the door, down the street, and at the grocery store. And it was his job to listen. But unfortunately, this is not anything that's getting any easier these days, right? We always have 27 tabs open behind our eyes, or, you know, the thing that is distracting us. What's that smell? I'm so hungry. I need to get on to the next thing. Or more importantly, we're listening for our opportunity to interject what we have to say, right? We're planning for our response. So we're going to go into an exercise with each other. Karis has set up one-on-one meeting rooms, and I want you all to practice just telling a quick story to each other. I'll give you a theme. Change. We were just talking about change. So figure out a quick story about change in your life or in your organization that you can tell to each other in just like 1 or 2 minutes. So this is an exercise that's a lot easier to do in the real world because it's a lot about the body language. So I will tell people to, like, you can't nod, you can't say uh-huh, you can't smile, you can't change your body language in any way. And that is really hard to do. But in this case, this sort of technological supplement for that will be to turn your camera off. And I see a lot of us do have our cameras off. So I want to encourage you to turn your camera on as you engage with each other. And then when the person is, like, as you introduce yourselves to each other, but then when the person is telling a story, you'll turn your camera off and then you'll switch. So I want you to just practice that, telling a story to each other really quick, 1 to 2 minutes, and then we're going to come back together and talk about what that feels like. So take it away, Karis.
All righty.
Hey, sure.
This meeting is being recorded.
Hey, Sharita, I heard you wound up in a room all by yourself. I'm so sorry to hear that. Hopefully you'll be able to tell your story in the next round, because we are getting ready to do something else cool. And I'm just remembering that I actually really meant to remind people that we had asked that you have some supplies nearby. So hoping that you might have some paper and some colorful pens, so that you can work on drawing your life map. So tell us, let's have some people, I know you just went back to hiding, but if you don't mind to come back onto camera, and we want to hear from people, what was that experience like, the deep listening exercise?
I didn't like not seeing the person I was speaking with.
Yeah, it's hard, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Did you also get to tell the story, Katrina? I mean,
I
did you also get to hear a story? What was it like to hear the story with your camera off?
I found myself nodding to the deep blackness. And and wanting to acknowledge I was engaged with the story in some way. And
Mhm.
so it was a little hard to not feel like I could convey that to the person who I was listening to.
Yeah, I hear that. So, as I mentioned, when I usually do this workshop in real world circumstances, the person, has to sit there and like cannot give any response. And I feel like the virtual version is a lot easier because, as you said, like you can just be behind the camera and still feel like you're doing all the things. And the whole reason for that exercise is because I'm trying to encourage you all to think about like all of the filters, the things that we have going on while we're trying to listen. So I'd love to hear from someone else. What was it like to either tell or listen to a story?
I'll go.
Hey, Kate.
I'm one of those people who listens better when I'm not being observed. I don't like performing listening. And I'm sure that there are other folks like that in the room too. So it is a relief to not have to perform while listening sometimes. And Trilla had a great story, so it was easy.
Oh, nice. Cool. Thank you for that. Heather, I see you coming on camera. Do you mind to tell us what your experience was like?
I kind of agree with some of the other speakers. I'm a very engaged speaker and listener, so it was hard, and I definitely like nodded and listened to her and everything, and it was hard not to react, especially, and I did at one point. I couldn't help myself. But yeah, because to I guess prove that I really was listening and I was engaged, and then in case I'm quizzed or questioned, I could repeat verbatim back what they were telling me about.
Gotcha. Oh, so I see a chat here. I really wanted to see Lacey as she told her story. Interesting. Okay, thank you for that. So as I mentioned, we're going to go into a time where we're going to work on developing some stories and what we want to share. Before I get into that, I want to mention this is one of our favorite sayings in the storytelling world, which is your story doesn't have to be factual, it just has to be true. Which is, I think, sometimes a little bit hard for those of us, especially if you're writing about other people, you feel like you got to get all of the, the facts right. But in order to tell a good personal story, I think that sometimes rounding out those edges and not getting too concerned about like making sure you see somebody who does that. They're like, so it was 1975 when my family oh, no, actually it was 1976, and they go on telling, oh, no, I'm just kidding. It was 1974. Like, these are not details that really, as long as you're in the ballpark, I think it's important to just tell a good story. So now we're going to do our life maps. So hopefully you've got your materials together, you're ready to draw. And we're going to do a truncated version of life maps. So the thing about life maps is that we're going to use this as an opportunity to maybe work on telling some new stories or figure out what our stories are. This is an activity that I have done with literally thousands of people. And I used to come to the activity with a map drawn so that you would see an example. But when I would do that, inevitably, I would see that people would come back and their roads would be shaped all the same as mine. They would use that as a template. And my life is not your life. My journey is not your journey. So I've stopped doing that. But I do want to encourage that, a map does have roads. So you're going to find some different moments and you're going to connect those by roads. And you're going to use symbols. There's brain science around why you shouldn't write a story out word for word before you tell it, by the way. The left side of your brain, and you probably know this whole thing about left brain, right? You've heard of this in school before or someplace. So one side of your brain is dedicated to the written and the other side is dedicated to the oral. So when you write a story out word for word, then you have to work twice as hard to get it to come out your mouth. So I'm really wanting to encourage you all to keep your stories in a very visual, lived experience place and not worry about writing it out. So that's why for your map, you're just going to make symbols rather than, putting a lot of detail on there. So your stories could start the day you were born. They could go back to your ancestors. They could end today, or you could leave room for the future for that manifesting story that you want to become true that we've talked about. So you're going to come up with 5 stories. And because of the nature of the work that you're here to do, they could be organizational stories. They could be the stories of the work that you do. Or they could be what makes you who you are, you know. But because it's always helpful to have a theme, because that kind of gives you a vessel to work within, we're going to use abundance or resources as the theme of your map. So I want you to work on drawing some stories and symbols that can be about like how you came to understand or approach the notion of abundance or resources. And it doesn't necessarily have to be, you know, right on point. You can put the story about the time that you were wrongfully accused of cheating in the 5th grade, or, you know, anything that you feel like makes you who you are and how you see the world and with this lens. Does that make sense? This is a great time to ask questions, because I'm going to sort of like cut you all loose, and it's a great opportunity to have a bio break, and you're going to have a few minutes to draw on your map, and then we'll come back together. Any questions?
So we're going to use symbols to tell our stories.
Mm-hmm. And those are going to be connected on the map through roads. So I'll go back to, so you can see some examples of other people in the maps that they've drawn. So again, I want you to be really creative and just do this in any way that makes sense to you. Just, you know, we're kind of using that metaphor of life is a highway, as they say in that song, or Pilgrim's Progress, or like there's all kinds of ways that the notion of journey as being the metaphor for a life is, you know, in our popular subconscious. So you're going to use that idea of what is the map of your life, the stories, or of your organization. What are the stories that make you who you are that have to do with this notion of abundance or resources? And it can be the opposite of that. You know, you may have learned a lot of lessons that have to do with the opposite of abundance. That is still very important. Does that help?
For me, it did. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right, so it's now 2:18 Central. Let's take, we'll start with 10 minutes. If people feel like they're not done in 10 minutes, we'll give you a little bit more time. So for 10 minutes, you're going to draw those stories. And also, like I said, feel free to turn your camera off and take a little bio break. I also really recommend putting on some music that you will groove to, that makes you feel nostalgic or in some way is just inspiring to you. So I used to, like when we do this in the real world, I do a whole soundtrack that we can draw to together, but that doesn't translate as well through webinar. So you put on your own music and we'll see you back here. Since I kept on talking, we'll say now 2:30. So you get 11 minutes, okay? Okay, we're gonna start making our way back together. Be so helpful if you would be willing to come on camera as we come back for this time. We are going to go into another set of breakout rooms, but here in a second. First, I just want to get some general thoughts or feelings, experiences from having done your life map. Tell us about that to the whole group.
I'll share.
Mm-hmm.
I think what was most interesting about it is how can you be succinct in telling a story that covers what's potentially pretty big scale, big scope for your life. Thought it was pretty interesting to try to find the little symbols and the mapping to capture that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you for that. And I think that's one of the mistakes people sometimes make in trying to tell a story is they tell something that like has to do with a long, as you said, a lot of geography in your life. So I feel like it is about honing down and figuring out those details. I also find that sometimes there may not be change in like one anecdote or a piece of our lives that we come up with, but if we layer that with another story, another symbol on the map, and you're able to show the change between those two moments, that can sometimes become a very juicy story. Any other thoughts or reflections from making your life map?
I kind of agree with Ron in that, like, one of the interesting things was trying to take this big, complex, muddled series of events that led from the beginning of the story to the end of the story, and try to simplify it down to like, what are 2 or 3 things? Like, how am I going to symbolize this small chunk of this story in like this much?
Yeah. I'm curious if you had this experience. Sometimes people talk about this, like in the going back and putting these stories together, that it's almost like watching a movie with someone where they haven't seen it, but you have, and you're like, oh, you don't know when this happens, then later on, this becomes like a really important thing. You know, it's kind of interesting to relive your life or your stories this way, because you start to see the way that there are threads or through lines or themes there. Well, with that in mind, we're going to go into some breakout rooms and give you all the opportunity to practice using all your best skills, the things that we've talked about so far today. So remember your first line, your last line, your details, your vulnerability, your change, and just have a chance to practice those stories. So Karis, let's give this, we're going to have breakout rooms of about 4 or 5 people, and we're going to give them about 15 minutes. And so the important thing about sharing your story at this point is, and this is the really hard thing, you cannot share your whole life map. I mean, I don't know about you, but I have lived almost 48 years on this planet. And if I tried to share my whole life map, it would take a really gosh darn long time. So that's why we're working on the skill of telling your story, which is to make judicious choices. So pick one story, one symbol. And, if you need to layer a couple with each other to show change, that's fine. But you cannot start with, I was born in a van down by the river. Tell your whole story. You can't do it. It's not going to work. Okay. Any questions about the breakout rooms at this point? Okay. Well, we will look forward to coming back together. We'll say at 2:50 y'all's time. Okay.
Here you go.
All right. Take care. So welcome back. I see we are down to like a great, beautiful crew that I can see all on the same screen. So as we broadcast out, we really want to encourage you to, for just a hot second, come onto the camera and everybody hold up your life maps, because we want to take a picture for Mid-America Arts Alliance and for Story Muse. And, you can even have it. I'm going to put it on the private page that I built. So hold up your life maps and hold it a little closer to the camera if you have that blurring effect on yours. Yes, perfect, beautiful. Everybody, while you're doing this, take a chance to engage and enjoy people's life maps. Like, isn't this so fun? Like, don't you want to know what that story is? This is one of the things I miss about the real world too. It's just how I would walk around, and we would all walk around after the life maps had been drawn, and we'd make a gallery. And when I see these maps, it always makes me think about, okay, thank you, you can put those down. Makes me think about when I'm driving in Atlanta traffic and somebody cuts me off and I want to show them some part of my hand, and how much it would be so nice if that life map could just become revealed to each other, Like, how much more empathy would we have for each other if we could connect with those stories, and almost like the cartoon thought bubbles that become revealed. So let's hear a little bit about your experience of sharing your stories with each other. Please just talk about what you learned, what you're taking away from this, what you would like to know more about. Let's hear about that experience. Phyllis?
I found as I went through the process, I was forced to prioritize and to be selective. And my takeaway is when approaching telling whatever story I'm telling, that I've been engaged in it, but it's not been a part of my conscious awareness. So it's just brought that to the fore.
Thank you for that. Thank you so much. Who else has something they want to share about either what it was like to draw their life map or to share it with other people?
It was hard for me to use only drawings. So I put a few abbreviations. I just couldn't help making letters. And so just thinking about some of these bigger concepts and how to illustrate that or just capture that little nugget is something to think about.
Thank you for that, Katrina. Megan, I feel like you've got something on your mind. You want to tell us about your life map experience?
Sure. So our group, the time got cut short. So I went last. And so I really got to abbreviate my abbreviated thoughts and my abbreviated story, which I think was a great exercise in and of itself. So yeah, taking those particular moments, and there was a very specific path that I had chosen, that I had written about or graphed about. And I ended up sharing just kind of the crux of it, that highlighted point for sure within what I shared. So, or had planned to share versus what I actually did share.
Yeah, I apologize for that. In a lot of ways, this is an experience where this would be a 4-hour workshop in the real world, and we sort of crammed it down to 2 so that people will stay together. But it's really hard when you start feeling like you're, kind of rushing through toward the end here. Lori, Karen, go for it.
Oh, I was just going to say that we kind of talked about this in our group, it was so interesting because I think so many times we're asked to tell stories relying only on our words. And this time you asked us to share a story or create the story, at least relying only on images, and kind of that importance of using all the tools at your disposal when you're really trying to get a story across. So like when you're applying for a grant or you're doing a fundraising ask, of like adding the pictures, adding the information that comes from the 3rd grader who came to the organization for the first time and drew a picture of them happy on your doorstep, like using truly everything at your disposal, because when you're asked to use just one of them, it gets more complicated. And so just remembering to use it all.
God, I love that. Thank you so much. And I totally know what you're talking about in terms of the grant writing and all those little boxes you got to fill in. Yeah. Any other? Oh, I was about to call on Lori. Do you have thoughts?
There we go. Yes, it was really a lovely discussion. There were 3 of us, and we actually had a talk about the idea of abundance and what does that mean and what does that look like. And it's not always simple or straightforward or even easy to think about abundance because immediately you start dissecting it's all about comparison, and or it can be, and how that relates to how you approach people with regard to fundraising, and how can we really deliver the message of the importance of art, any discipline of art, when you're in an environment, as I am, where there is so much felt need, where there are more needs, more tremendous causes than there could ever be resources for. So just that snippet of that conversation was really, really good, really encouraging.
Oh, lovely. Thank you for sharing that. And what an important way to think about our audiences and our potential donors, right? So someone sharing their abundance with you could be $5, whereas for someone else sharing their abundance with you would be $5,000. And they both will feel like they've made a significant gift. And that's one of the reasons why it's so important for us to have multiple strategies running all at the same time. I know we're coming to the end of their time, and I appreciate you all so much for having shared so deeply with each other and with our group. I want to just real quickly, a couple things as we wrap up. I want to remind you that you will be receiving a private webpage for our group, which will include lots of things on it, lots of great resources, as well as an invitation and a request to stay connected. But just in case, here are some places where you can find me and stay connected. If there's work that I could do with your individual organization or community, I'd love to be in touch about that. But I just really appreciate having the opportunity to be a part of your story today. And with that, I'll kick it back over to Karis to see if she has any other closing thoughts.
Hello, and thank you so much to Shannon for guiding us through this introduction to storytelling. I have no more thoughts. The only thoughts I mean, they're not even thoughts. Be kind to yourselves and have a great weekend and be kind to each other.